Welcome to the #1 source for information, news, and opinion on your Columbus Blue Jackets. This is CBJ in 30, presented by Telhio Credit Union. You can also find the audio version on the CBJ Radio SoundCloud page, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Google Play Music, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Now here's your host, Bob McElligott.
Welcome to CBJ in 30, presented by Telhio Credit Union on a day where it looks like there's actually news. Actually, real news about the National Hockey League's return to play for the 2020-2021 season. Or will it just be the 2021 season? Because they're not going to get started until after the first of the year. But, again, news for the first time in a long time. And let me get you to the breaking news right now. This coming down late on Monday night. And both TSN and Sportsnet both reporting this. This is from Elliotte Friedman from Sportsnet, saying that the NHL and the Players Association will continue to negotiate the protocols for the season, but they did agree that the economic framework of the newly negotiated collective bargaining agreement, remember they did that back before the start of the playoffs in the summer, they are not going to change the economic framework. They have agreed that that will stay in place. Now, remember, last month, it was the league that asked the players to consider increasing deferred payments and caps on escrow at certain points in the agreement. The players reacted very negatively to that, and they made it clear they would not consider touching escrow. So multiple sources are now saying that they were willing to defer additional monies in exchange for what they consider to be a meaningful concession. And Friedman reports one of the suggestions, for example, was slightly raising the salary cap to put more money in the system. So we'll wait and see what happens with all of that. No deal could be reached. Both sides decided to move on. So they are on to negotiating the protocol. So it looks as though, for all intents and purposes, it looks as though they have the finances figured out on this. And that is great news because it was the finances that was going to hold the whole thing back anyway. Now, I know there's still a lot of hurdles. You've got to figure out where you're going to play, how you're going to play, and all of that. I understand that. The target right now seems to be a January 13th start date for the season. The non-playoff teams, remember the 7 teams that didn't make it into the play-in round or the playoffs themselves, they will report on December 28th. Everybody else will report on January the 1st. Looks like there's going to be no exhibition games. Sorry, they're just not my favorites anyway. So no exhibition games. And there could be a short-term hub plan that is being worked on just in case teams can't get into their buildings in their cities. Elliotte Friedman also reporting the biggest headache might be training camp plans in places like Montreal, San Jose, Arizona, Winnipeg. They all have strict current restrictions due to COVID-19. It looks like it could be a problem in those particular markets, but he finishes up by saying it sounds like there is a desire to get something done by the end of the week that'll be voted on by the Board of Governors and the players. So we'll find out where it goes in which direction. But again, it looks like it could be an early Christmas because there very well could be NHL hockey coming right after the first of the year with training camp. And then January 13th looks to be that targeted date. It's moved. It's shifted. It has been all over the place, right? But I think that's realistic. I really do think that it is. And I should have known this was going to happen today because I actually have this show out one day earlier this week than I normally do it. I normally wait till the middle of the week. And I'm bringing it out early for you because I worked ahead. And that's how I knew that there was a good chance something would happen. That's, just my luck here. But that's all right. Scott Burnside, who covers the league for The Athletic, just did an article late last week on this whole return to play. And Scott's going to be on with me in just a minute here, and we're going to talk about all this. And again, now what we're going to talk about, some of it looks like it's starting to, head in the right direction here. So I wanted to get this out while this was still very pertinent and while it all still made sense. But right now I've got to remind you that 'tis the season for holiday personal loans from Telhio. You really need to check that out. There's so many people that could use a little extra money at this time of the year. Maybe you want to make a big purchase or have a little winter getaway. Maybe you need to pay off some high-interest credit cards or consolidate your debt. Well, you can get the cash that you need with a personal loan from Telhio, and the rates are lower than most credit cards. To find out more, just visit their website at telhio.org. Telhio Credit Union, find them on the web at telhio.org. Well, as I just told you, Scott Burnside, he has been breaking this down. A lot of people have from the national, or should I say international standpoint. Scott Burnside is one of those guys. Years ago, he worked at ESPN. He had a little stint with the Dallas Stars after that. But for the last couple of years, he has been writing for The Athletic. He covers the league very, very well. And I had a chance to catch up with him and talk about the return to play, the effects it has on the league, the Blue Jackets, how it affects them, how he sees the Blue Jackets with what they've done and what they might do while, this is all going on with this whole return to play plan. And also talked about some of the other teams in the East that may or may not be in the same division as the Blue Jackets when the NHL returns to play. But without further ado, please welcome in Scott Burnside. Well, Scott, here we are leading to Christmas, still waiting to see when the National Hockey League is going to return to play. I know you had a big piece about it late last week in The Athletic. It seems as though that date has finally slipped a little bit. Again, the league hasn't come out and said it, but Pierre Lebrun, who's your colleague there at The Athletic, has pretty much let it be known that January 1st is not going to be in the equation. It's more like January the 15th. I think anybody that can do a little bit of math knows that for all the things the league has to put together and the amount of time they have to do it, January 15th is probably a lot more realistic. As you're researching for stories and you're writing things and you're talking to both sides, what kind of a sense are you getting as far as how close these two sides may be to actually finalizing what they need so that they can start a season?
Yeah, Bob, it's such a great question, and I wish I was able to pinpoint an answer on, when that might happen, because there are so many moving parts to this, and it's a, as much as it was a Herculean task to get the NHL back and playing the playoffs in two bubble cities in Toronto and Edmonton, I think getting the 2021 season up and off the ground might even be more complex, because you're talking 31 different markets, you're talking different levels of COVID spread in, from one coast to the other, both in Canada and the United States. You've got a border between the two countries that is going to remain closed for the foreseeable future. So there's a lot to contemplate when you're trying to figure out how a schedule might look. And we know the Canadian division is going to be a thing for this season. That leaves you with 3 8-team divisions in the United States. I think everyone seems to agree that those groupings will be more or less geographic, cut down on travel costs, those kinds of things. But in terms of an actual date, and as much as the league and the Players Association continue to talk, I would say almost every day, about the mechanics or the nuts and bolts of, okay, if we play 56 games, how will we make the travel look? What does this schedule look like? What is our testing protocol going to look like? Of course, the elephant in the room remains, can the two sides agree on what the economics are going to be that allow us to move forward? And until that moment happens, we won't know whether January 15th is a realistic start date, whether it's more like February 1st, because as you point out, you backtrack at least, let's call it 2 weeks for a training camp. Let's call it another 4 or 5 days for the 7 teams that didn't make the playoffs, who were promised extra time on the ice. Travel time into all of the markets for players who may be in Russia or Sweden or Finland. What are the local quarantine issues for players coming into those markets? So every day that we don't have a deal between the players and the owners on what the economics are going to look like, that puts a January 15th start in jeopardy. So I would guess, by the end of this week, if there was an agreement, at least on the economic part of it, and that I think will mean more salary deferral by the players, then we could see a January 15th start. But there is a real sense of urgency, because the more games that get played, the better it is for the players and the owners. So there is some real urgency to get this done sooner than later.
The money aspect of it is it's a difficult one on both sides. I understand that. First of all, the players and the league, they have that shared revenue deal in the collective bargaining agreement. But the other part about it is the players have already deferred some salary. Word is the league wants them to defer some more. And it's almost can't win for the players, because if you don't want to do that, there are plenty of regular people out there that have lost their jobs, or they've taken pay cuts, or it's very easy to look at the high-paid athletes and point the finger and say, why shouldn't they have to give a little bit the way I've had to give a little bit? And from the owners, it's the same thing. I don't think by Joe Fan they get singled out as necessarily as quickly as the players do. But that's such a PR thing on both sides, especially for a league that just made a new deal with the players to extend the CBA over the summer, right?
Well, I certainly, and you're absolutely right. I think, for the fans, they identify with the players because they're buying the tickets to go and see Max Domi or Nick Foligno or whoever they're going to see play. The ownership is a little bit more of an ethereal kind of thing, and maybe harder to get mad at a faceless ownership group. But, certainly, you talk to the players, they signed a deal with the owners 5 months ago, and now the owners are basically coming, more or less hat in hand, asking for more givebacks. I think that what needs to be sort of kept in some perspective is that, I think what we'll see is, you're right. They, players were already agreeing to defer salary 10%. They've been asked, as our reporting has gone, certainly Pierre Lebrun has reported this, and leagues asked for an additional 16% deferral for this season, which is a lot. That's money that gets paid back. So it's a question, and I think what the owner's saying is, boy, we didn't really think it was going to be this bad. We didn't know or didn't anticipate that the economic blowback from the COVID-19 pandemic was going to be as onerous as it is when we look at this season, because there's a very good chance we won't see any or many fans in those buildings, certainly for the vast majority of the season. Maybe with the vaccine, you see fans coming back in April, May, June. No one really knows that yet. But I think from the players' perspective, saying, we could have anticipated almost all of this when we signed that deal 5 months ago. We knew there was going to be, or anticipated, a spike in the fall and winter. We knew that the league was likely going to play a truncated schedule. We knew with relative certainty that fans would not be allowed in the buildings, certainly early, if at all, during the season. So I can see where there is more than a little bristling from the player side at this ask. But I think, again, you take a step back and you look big picture at this, at the NHL. I don't think there's anyone who believes that the league is further ahead if they shutter this season. We already know the NBA is coming back before Christmas. We know baseball preparing for spring training. We know the NFL, in spite of some missteps and rescheduling and tinkering there because of COVID tests, positive tests at a variety of levels, is plowing forward through their season. I think with a national television deal set to be up at the end of this 2021 season, a bunch of regional television deals. We know that Seattle coming into the league, number 32 of NHL teams, in theory next fall for the start of the 21-22 season. And then even beyond that, an agreement in principle for the players to return to the Olympics in Beijing in 2022. It is imperative that some season gets played, so that there is a 2021 season of some form. And I think that's why ultimately most people believe a deal will get done. It'll probably happen sooner than later, and we will see some hockey. Again, a lot of external circumstances outside of just the economic agreement that will lead to the return of hockey. But I think that we will see it because it is imperative for this league to play at least some form in this coming season.
Talking with Scott Burnside, who writes for The Athletic. You brought up the TV deal, and I don't know how many people understand how big that really is. I mean, first of all, you want to get this season done. You want to get through your current deal that you have with NBC. And then, of course, there's been a lot of talk about that contract having much more value this time than it did the last time that it was signed, and that it could be multiple networks now that are engaging with the National Hockey League, which, Scott, I think you'll agree. I think the league needs I think it needs to branch out. I think what they've had has been great. If you go back to when they signed with NBC, and remember when it was the Outdoor Life Network when they first started, before it even transformed, and then it was Versus, then it was NBC Sports Network. So they've come a long way, and NBC has been a great partner. I'm not disparaging that whatsoever, but I think if more people become involved and it's more valuable, that's just good for everybody involved in the league.
Yeah, no question. And I think you see that with basketball and the ability for, I think baseball too operates the same way. If you are on different networks, the ability to cross promote, the ability to share time. Like let's say, I used to work at ESPN, was there for a long time. I think there is a feeling that ESPN would love to get back into NHL hockey. Does it actually help NBC Sports if there is, maybe there's a game of the week on ESPN and the deal is that there is cross promotion? Do you share some of the playoffs? The playoffs become a very, it becomes logistically and economically a challenge for NBC to put all those playoff games on their different platforms. Does it work to maybe share some of that with ESPN? Maybe the profile goes up for the game across all of the spectrums, and that way it helps everyone. I think there is a benefit to it. And, again, thinking even beyond that to streaming services, other different ways that hockey fans might be able to consume the game when the league is in a position to renegotiate all of that American broadcasting picture. And it stands to be a very important time for the NHL. Of course, the expansion fees will be dispersed if the schedule holds to, assuming the schedule holds the way it's supposed to, and Seattle does come into the league and next season starts relatively speaking on time, that expansion fee is dispersed. That's an important part for the 30 owners. Vegas doesn't get a cut of that, but it's really, it's an important time. And again, it goes back to this notion that we really need to see some hockey this season, because that is a pivotal first domino that, in theory, should see the league begin to emerge from what we've seen within the last year or so with the effects of the coronavirus.
You mentioned the different divisional lineups a little bit ago. And of course, as you said, the Canadian division is going to have to be, because the border's not open, and it doesn't look like it's going to be open anytime soon. So those 7 teams will play in their own division. And then the other 24 teams look to be divided up into 3 groups of 8. Have you heard what that layout is going to be? Because I've seen different speculation, and I've seen the Blue Jackets in a new kind of a central division, if you will. One thing, especially our fans would like to know, I'm sure, is, do the Pittsburgh Penguins get grouped in geographically, or do they still stay in with the old Patrick division and now Metropolitan division teams that they've been with for so long? What have you gotten any sense of how they might lay this whole thing out?
I don't. I'm the same as you. You've heard various sorts of things. And basically the way it's been described to me is take a look at the map and then cluster the 24 American teams as much as you can geographically. I mean, that's why, the Western teams are sort of easy, but you'll see St. Louis or Minnesota. One of those teams will likely slide into that sort of more central division. What do you do with natural rivalry? Do you automatically have Pittsburgh and Philadelphia staying together? I think the idea of having, 3 hours down the road from Pittsburgh, having made that drive myself during the playoffs, that seems to make sense to me. I think the 2 Florida teams, how do you, I think there's basically some sort of scrunching and moving about that will have to be done before that's finalized. But I'm like you. I've heard sort of variations on a theme. Again, I think it's mostly geographic. The 3 New York teams will be clustered together. Do you automatically put Philadelphia and Washington in that group? What does Buffalo do? So I think there are a couple of outliers that have to be accounted for, but it is, more or less it's going to be geographic, but the final 8 in each of those 2 more Eastern divisions, I'm not sure where the line will be divided. It's like, in elections, right? You you redefine your electoral lines. We may be seeing some of that. So.
Yeah, and I think that there will be teams knocking the door down to get into this Central Division and not be in that Eastern Division. You know, Buffalo, they made some trades. They signed Taylor Hall, and there's a likelihood that they could wind up in with the New York teams and with Philly and Washington and with Boston. And good luck to you. Congratulations on all that money that you spent. And I would much rather it would be them there than be the Blue Jackets there, quite frankly.
Well, and I like that. You know, I'm fascinated because it's, you know, there's been enough sort of shifting and again, I like how Jarmo has built this Columbus team. I think Max Domi is going to be terrific there. I think the goaltending is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. So yeah, you know, doesn't matter. It's not going to be easy, and especially if we, you know, again, if we understand what some of the plans are, if you're going to play only in your division, you know, it's just not going to be easy to get into the playoffs. Doesn't matter what your grouping is, but maybe you're right. Maybe if you're in a more centralized division, that might be a little bit more palatable if you're a Columbus Blue Jackets team that I think has a ton of absolute upside. So I enjoyed watching them in Toronto in that bubble. I felt like that 5 games lasted like 3 weeks. I wanted to see more of it. So
I felt like the first game against Tampa lasted 3 weeks too, but which kind of did. Let me ask you this, since you're talking about the Blue Jackets and their setup. Once the league actually decides when it's going to play, then there will be deadlines that will be put in place. And some of those deadlines, when it comes to the Blue Jackets, there'll be a deadline of when they have to have Pierre-Luc Dubois signed by. I get that. But also for the teams that are over the cap, now there will be deadlines as to when you have to get under the cap. And what teams do you see? Obviously, Tampa's one of them, but are there really going to be players that might not normally be available that will be available at a good price for a team like the Blue Jackets to jump on and add?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you're right. Once we get to that point, there are 3 or 4 teams that are right at it. I mean, Toronto is certainly one of them. Tampa is the most fascinating team because there may be some domino effect there. I know a lot of people are looking at a player like, well, Tyler Johnson, who was put on waivers earlier, a guy like Alex Killorn. You know, the Stanley Cup champions have people they're going to have to move. Now, Julien Brisebois, maybe one of the smartest young GMs in the league, maybe he has a plan or plan A and plan B ready to implement the moment that we find out the final deadline on, yes, we're going to start on this date. Here's where teams have to be cap compliant, all those kinds of things. But I do think there are teams that have some cap space that may be just waiting in the wings. That may be why we've seen an unrestricted free agent like Mike Hoffman, who remains unsigned at this point. You know, I think of a team like Nashville that did some maneuvering in the offseason, created some cap space for itself. I know the feeling there is maybe they're trying to pare things down and get back to their old identity, but they may be a team that could step into the breach and maybe leverage some of the cap woes of other teams. Columbus certainly in that mix as well. It will be interesting to see, and we know from history that Jarmo Kekalainen is not afraid of the big move. He's not afraid to be bold. But it may also be one of those things that teams that have this kind of luxury right now may be biding their time. Whenever a trade deadline might be for a 50 or 56 game season, is that a better time to make that kind of move? Are you better served, as we know, with a flat cap for the next 3 or 4 years? Probably. You know, that cap space is a tremendous asset to have. You don't want to give it up willingly, or you don't want to give it up unless you're sure the return is going to put you in a better place. You know, for a team like Columbus, to me, it's no longer about can we make the playoffs. This is a team that needs to make another step to establish itself as a legitimate cup contender. I don't think they're very far away, maybe a piece or two, but you don't want to make that move too soon. So it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and let me ask you about the Islanders too now. How much more comparable are they to the Blue Jackets? They have a star to sign in Matthew Barzal. They've got to sign him. Now with Johnny Boychuk having to retire, they have a lot of cap space out there too. To me, just on paper, they look really similar to the Blue Jackets. You know, same thing. Big star to sign and then big money to spend.
Yeah, the Islanders are interesting, and I wondered about them. To me, the biggest difference between those two teams, Blue Jackets absolutely don't have a need on the back end for that kind of star power, for that kind of, uh, sort of building block or cornerstone defenseman. Seth Jones is, I just thought he was so outstanding in the playoffs. Always been a big fan of him as a person and a player. Definitely Norris trophies in the future for him if he stays healthy and continues on his arc. The Islanders, for me, a team a lot, playing defense by committee under Barry Trotz. I thought they were a team that might, sort of in a perfect world have pursued a guy like a Torrey Krug. It didn't happen that way. Of course, Torrey Krug going to St. Louis to fill the void left with Alex Pietrangelo going to Vegas. But I think the Islanders are a team that maybe that's an area that they might want for down the road. If you're talking about that line between playoff team and legitimate contender, I'm not sure their back end is where it needs to be. I think the Blue Jackets, and they've addressed some of this. I'm not sure, again, do you have enough depth up front? I know there's some nice young pieces and there's a lot to be really excited about. I think that'll be the interesting part, especially if there isn't a move before the start of a season. Guys like Foudy and the rest of the young players that I thought were so impressive in that playoff run. Can you do that now on a nightly basis in a regular season? And does that dictate then what Jarmo Kekalainen does as you move forward toward a trade deadline or when you might make use of that cap space? Pierre-Luc Dubois, you mentioned him. Just so much fun to watch. And, now you got to see, are you going to be able to do that on a nightly basis? And if those young players can assume those kinds of roles, it allows you a little bit more flexibility with that cap space, I think.
Last thing I want to ask you about is the other New York team, because I know you had a chance to spend some time with the number 1 overall pick, Alexis Lafreniere. And, man, the Rangers, they get into the playoffs. They're supposedly still rebuilding. They get into the playoffs. They don't perform well in the playoffs. They get knocked out in that play-in round. And then, lo and behold, they get the best player available in the draft. Not too shabby for the New York Rangers. How far along is their rebuild the minute they add this guy to their lineup?
Yeah, well, it's an enormous step, and I think Alexis Lafreniere is a cornerstone, generational player. He's a little bit different than we've seen some of the players who've come at number 1 in recent years. He's not a center. And the Rangers are not flush down the middle. So there's a team when you talk about how, where are they at in their rebuild, probably not as deep down the middle as they'll need to be if they are going to take that jump up. But boy, so much talent in that lineup. Artemi Panarin. And there were a lot of people who not only suggested he was full value for being a finalist for the Hart Trophy, but there were a lot of people who thought maybe he should have been in for the Selke because whenever he was on the ice, the other team never had the puck. And just a tremendous first season for him as a free agent there. Mika Zibanejad evolving into a true leader on that team. The blue line is young, evolving, goaltending, very young, first time in a generation really without Henrik Lundqvist there. So I think it's a question of how quickly it can be expected for that young group to coalesce. You mentioned they get into the playoffs as a play-in team, got swept by Carolina. I think that revealed that this is a team that still has a lot to learn. But boy, that arc in terms of expectation and in terms of excitement, Capo Caco, number 2 pick a year ago, that was a mouthful for him his first NHL season. But he's a really high-end talent. It's going to be fun to watch that team. I think a sort of a fire wagon kind of situation there with that Ranger team. So it's going to be fun. Lafreniere I see no reason he won't step right in. He's a late birthday, so he played 3 years of junior in Rimouski. He is a man, and he's ready to play with men. So I'm fascinated to see how he makes out.
When you got together and talked with him, I know there was a lot of chatter in Canada about whether or not he might play on the World Junior team, and of course he's not going to, which is, personally, I understand it. I understand why they want him to, obviously, and I could also understand if I'm the Rangers, I'm going, well, he got hurt there last year too, right? So, did did you talk about that at all? I mean, was it sometimes players want to go, they're not allowed to go. Sometimes they don't want to go, but they don't want to tell you that.
Yeah, it's interesting because had this conversation with someone recently during the Western Conference Final 2 years ago. I was talking to Robbie Thomas, and the same kind of thing came up at the time, the World Juniors in that 18-19 seasons when the Blues won the Cup. In 18, the Blues weren't very good, right? And they were in last place at one point, made a coaching change. And Doug Armstrong asked Robbie Thomas if he wanted to go back and play with Team Canada. He said, no, I've already done that, and I want to be part of the process here. And I don't know if there was that kind of conversation with Alexis Lafreniere, but I know the Rangers very clear on wanted him to focus on getting ready for training camp. And I know from Lafreniere's perspective, captain of that Canada team, got hurt early in the tournament, came back, was the MVP, won a gold medal. I think you've accomplished what you need to accomplish at that level. And now the focus is on being an NHL player. And I think that's absolutely the right call.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, from Team Canada and from a Canadians fans' point of view, absolutely you want them to play there, but we all know how life is. I mean, sometimes you feel that you have moved by that, and it's time to move down the road. And so again, when you're talking about him and talking about the Rangers and talking about the Islanders, again, that's more reasons I hope the Blue Jackets are in a totally different division this year. That's why I'm okay with it, Scott. Hey, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. It's great to see you. It's great to talk with you. So used to seeing you on the road from time to time during the season. And boy, I'll tell you, I hope we get back to that sometime sooner than later so that we actually get to network and see our friends again. So thanks for doing this. I appreciate it, and stay safe.
Yeah, anytime, Bob. And I look forward to exactly the same, my friend. So thank you very much.
That is Scott Burnside, who covers the NHL for The Athletic. And look for his feature on Alexis Lafreniere. See, I said Lafreniere because every time I watch the Canadian broadcast, that's how they say it. Now, Scott said it differently. The only way that it becomes official is when he's actually being interviewed and he says, this is how I say it. So anyway, but he will be doing that article, that feature on Alexis Lafreniere. That's coming up in just a couple of days in The Athletic, so you can look for it there. So, pretty exciting, right? Absolutely exciting. And what I just talked about with Scott, to me, is the most important thing. One of the things I just talked to him about is the most important things, deadlines. Those deadlines that I have harped on numerous times. I can't wait for the deadlines because I want to know when Pierre-Luc Dubois needs to be signed by. I need to know when the Tampa Bay Lightning and other salary compliant teams have to be under the cap and they have to make some deals to get rid of some players, and that the Blue Jackets might be able to benefit from some of that. That's what I'm looking forward to the most, because as we're waiting for answers, okay, and maybe January 13th is the answer, maybe it's not the answer. If they want to play 56 games, that's closer to being the answer, of course. But if that's going to be the answer there, then the answers of what division are the Blue Jackets going to be in? Who are they going to be with? How are they going to be grouped? And I've told you before, and we alluded to it just a little bit, what I've seen, the constants are Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, Nashville, Columbus, Florida, Tampa, and I've seen Carolina. A lot of people speculate Pittsburgh. I really don't know if the Penguins are going to be okay with being separated from the Flyers. I really don't know if the league cares, if it works better for them. Maybe they don't care. I have no idea. I think the Penguins, from a competitive standpoint, with the way that they are, and they overhauled their team a lot here in the last couple of months, they might feel better playing in this modified Central Division as opposed to the Metropolitan Division that also will include the likes of the Boston Bruins now. So I could see where Pittsburgh would, is it going to be Pittsburgh that doesn't want to be, or is it going to be Pittsburgh that tries to demand to be with Philadelphia, or is it going to be the league that wants them with Philadelphia? Is it going to be Philadelphia that wants to be with them? I don't know. If you get stuck playing within your own division, and that's another answer that we'll be looking for here in the next couple of weeks. If you're playing within your own division, even though fans are not a factor right now, I mean, at least as far as we know, If fans aren't going to be a factor, does it matter if the Penguins and the Flyers are in two different divisions? I don't know. We're going to find out all of these answers as we go on in the next couple of weeks. But again, late Monday night, the word is amongst the NHL media that the players and the owners no longer talking about financing, how they're going to do it with the money in the league. They're just talking about the return to play, the protocols, where they're going to play, how they're going to play, and when they're going to play. And that target date right now, as of this moment, seems to be around January the 13th. Again, training camps would start on January the 1st for the teams that were in the playoffs. The teams that missed, those 7 teams would report somewhere in the neighborhood of December 28th. That's the way it is right now. But this is real news. Remember I said to you way back in the playoffs when the Blue Jackets were, it might have been after they were eliminated, or it might have been when they were close to being eliminated. I don't know what it was. But I do remember saying to you, the bad thing about when this is over is we go back into that limbo where we don't know when the next season starts, when we don't know what happens next. But now it looks like we are being pointed in a direction. It looks like maybe sooner than later, finally, we will know. So I will keep you up to date if there's anything else that breaks and that is pertinent. Almost said permanent. Well, that too. But if there's anything else pertinent, can always do one of these shows for you and get you up to date. So that's why I wanted to get this one out a day early, because this is breaking news. This is good news. It is something that we will all be excited about. Thanks again to Scott Burnside of The Athletic for dropping by and talking with me about the return of the National Hockey League. Thanks to you for being here as always. And until next time, I'm Bob McElligott saying so long.